April 10th, 2019. Lake Minnetonka, Minnesota. Police respond to a 911 call
911, what's your emergency?
at a mansion in one of America's wealthiest zip codes. By the time they arrived, 77-year-old Irwin Jacobs, also known as Irv the Liquidator, was found dead, along with his wife, Alexandra. They called it an apparent murder-suicide. Irv was a man who had survived hostile corporate takeovers, bankruptcy court, and decades of ruthless business warfare. In fact, he was known for his aggressive business practices, which is how he got the nickname. This was a man who built the largest private boat company in America, with revenue exceeding $1 billion at its peak. Unfortunately, 10 years earlier, that company collapsed. $87 million in liabilities, $18.9 million in assets. But the story you're about to hear isn't just about boats and the fall of a company. It's about the tragic story of a man who made a fortune dismantling other people's companies, who built an empire of his own, then lost everything in the 2008 crash, and finally ended his life. This is the story of how the tactics that let you win can make it impossible to survive losing. To understand what happened at Lake Minnetonka, we have to go back 30 years, to the 1980s, to Wall Street, to a very different version of Irwin Jacobs, to when corporate raiding in the 1980s followed one simple playbook that Irv the Liquidator knew oh so well. The playbook was: find a company trading below the value of its assets, buy enough stock to gain control, break it apart, sell the pieces, extract the difference. Irv specialized in this. He would identify companies where the sum of the parts exceeded the value of the whole, acquire them through hostile takeovers, then systematically liquidate their assets. He wasn't building anything. He was recognizing inefficiency and converting it to cash. In the course of his time, he's attempted to take over certain big companies, like Disney in 1985. He failed, but walked away with $60 million in profit from the stock position he'd accumulated. Irv also targeted AMF Incorporated, a major manufacturing conglomerate which he acquired and liquidated. Others include Watkins Johnson Company, a defense contractor, Pabst Brewing, Jacqueline Incorporated, and multiple other corporations. Irv's pattern was consistent: identify, acquire, dismantle, profit. By the early 1990s, Irwin Jacobs had built a fortune estimated at over $1 billion by destroying what others had built. The question that would define the next 20 years of his life was this: could a man who made his fortune liquidating companies successfully build one of his own? In 1991, he would try to find out. See, in the early 1990s, Jacobs decided to start building a company, and the industry he chose was recreational boating. Here's why that made sense. The boating industry in the 1990s was fragmented. Dozens of manufacturers, most of them family-owned regional businesses. Each brand operated independently with its own manufacturing, distribution, and dealer networks. Jacobs saw the same thing he'd seen in the companies he'd liquidated: inefficiency. But this time, he didn't want to break the companies apart. He wanted to consolidate them, combine manufacturing, eliminate redundant costs, leverage shared distribution, and create economies of scale. It was still the liquidator's eye, recognizing value that wasn't being captured. So he formed Genmar Holdings in 1993. The first acquisition was Lund Boat Company, a Minnesota-based fishing boat manufacturer. Then Crestliner, another fishing boat brand. Then he started moving faster. 1995. Larson Boats, a family-owned Wisconsin manufacturer. 1996. Ranger Boats, one of the premier bass fishing brands in America. 1997. Carver Yachts, moving into the luxury yacht segment. 1998. Wellcraft Marine, adding offshore fishing and performance boats. He kept going. His strategy appeared to be working. Jacobs was applying the efficiency mindset he'd developed in corporate raiding. Revenue grew from $200 million in 1995 to $500 million by 2000. By 2007, Genmar Holdings would reach $1 billion in annual revenue, the largest private boat company in America. What was beautiful is each brand maintained its identity. Each had its own customer base, but behind the scenes, manufacturing was consolidated, purchasing was centralized, and distribution was unified. Jacobs had done what he set out to do. He had built an empire, but building through acquisition created a specific vulnerability. Each acquisition was financed, so Genmar carried substantial debt because the business model required continuous growth in boat sales to service that debt. Thankfully, the Americans kept buying boats. Recreational boat sales in the United States reached 1.2 million units, the highest level in years. And then the housing market collapsed in 2008. Industry-wide boat sales in the US fell from 1.2 million units in 2007 to 790,000 in 2008. A 34% decline in a single year. A year later, in 2009, sales fell to 590,000 units, and they went from over $1 billion in 2007 to an estimated $600 million in 2008. So, still in early 2009, with Genmar running out of runway, Jacobs made a decision. He and his business partner, John Paul DeJory, injected $45 million into the company, their own capital, unsecured debt. This was Irv betting that he could save what he'd built, that he could navigate Genmar through the crash the same way he'd navigated dozens of corporate battles before. Unfortunately, he couldn't. On June 9, 2009, just 120 days after that $45 million injection, Genmar Holdings filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The filing revealed the depth of the problem. Assets, $18.9 million. Liabilities, $87 million. But where had the $45 million gone? Irv Jacobs would say later in an interview after the bankruptcy, "If you had asked me if bankruptcy was possible 2 weeks before we filed, I would have said it wasn't. What really did it was our bank. They pushed our back right through the wall." He described calling the bank, asking for more time to raise capital. He believed he could get the money. The bank's response: "You'll never put this company in bankruptcy. You just put $45 million into it." But here's the critical question. Did it have to work this way? Let's look at who survived. A. Brunswick Corporation, the world's largest boat manufacturer at the time, faced the exact same market collapse. Their boat division revenue fell from $1.7 billion in 2007 to $828 million in 2009, a 51% decline, nearly identical to the industry average. Brunswick didn't just survive, they used the crisis to strengthen their position. Here's specifically what they did differently. 1. Lower leverage going into the crisis. 2. Strategic plant closures, not panic shutdowns. 3. They supported their dealer network. 4. They shifted the product mix toward value. The result was that Brunswick stayed profitable through parts and accessories, maintained their dealer network, and emerged from the recession as the dominant player when the market recovered. B. Tracker. Marine, on the other hand, took a different approach. 1. Minimal debt. 2. Value-focused product line. 3. Integrated retail distribution. Tracker also had layoffs and closed their Bolivar and Missouri plant, but those decisions helped the company survive, and by 2012, they were growing again. Genmar had none of these characteristics, but that wasn't all. Then the legal warfare began. In bankruptcy court, Genmar's assets were sold to Platinum Equity, a California private equity firm, for $77 million. Most of that went to secured creditors, primarily Wells Fargo and Fifth Third Bank, owed a combined $75 million. The brands were dispersed. Ranger Boats was sold to a management group. Carver Yachts was liquidated. Larson and Glastron were sold to other manufacturers. Jacobs, of course, fought back. His legal response argued that Genmar had recorded a $122 million profit in 2004. That the company remained solvent at all material times prior to its bankruptcy filing, that he and DeJory had injected $45 million specifically because they believed the company would survive. The legal battles would continue for years. Jacobs called the bankruptcy the most humbling and painful experience of my business career. But he did try to rebuild. In 2010, he and DeJoria acquired some of Genmar's assets, specifically Larson and Lund, through a new company called J&D Holdings. He talked about reaching $300 to $400 million in revenue within a few years. But that didn't work out. The legal fights already drained resources and credibility. So by the mid-2000s, Jacobs had largely retreated to his liquidation business, Jacobs Trading Company. In 2011, he sold even that business for $140 million. Then something else started happening. The years after Genmar were difficult in ways that aren't fully visible from outside. His son Mark would later reveal that at the time of Irwin's death, his father had debts exceeding $110 million. Creditors included U.S. Bank and the Pollard family, a Minneapolis banking and real estate dynasty whose late patriarch Carl Pollard had helped finance some of Jacobs' ventures. This was a man whose personal fortune had been estimated at $400 million in the 1990s. By 2019, his estate was potentially insolvent, but the financial pressure wasn't the only force. His wife, Alexandra, began showing symptoms of dementia in the mid-2000s. Her condition progressively worsened. Jacobs became her primary caregiver. People who knew him during this period described a man who was increasingly isolated. The business network that had surrounded him during the Genmar years had dispersed. The legal battles had alienated others. He had stopped driving due to his own health issues. Reports indicated he'd been experiencing seizures. Friends even said he had been talking more about his mortality in the months before April 2019. Sadly, dementia caregiving is one of the most difficult challenges a person can face. It requires emotional resilience, support systems, and professional help. For someone whose life had been defined by control of companies, control of negotiations, control of outcomes, watching a loved one's cognitive decline is a specific kind of helplessness. By early 2019, Alexandra's condition had deteriorated significantly, and Jacobs was significantly distraught. Unfortunately, on April 10, 2019, at their Lake Minnetonka mansion, Irwin Jacobs fatally shot his wife and then himself. Authorities found them both deceased, but a note was found, though its contents have not been publicly disclosed. There is no excuse for what happened on April 10, 2019. Tragedy is tragedy. Here's what matters for anyone building something. The same aggression that lets you build an empire quickly creates vulnerability when conditions change. Build for speed if you must, but understand you're trading resilience for velocity. The question isn't whether to build aggressively. The question is whether you're building something that can survive your failure or just building a tower that collapses when you fall.